Quickware plus strategy plus sweet pet plus good pregnancy plus smash abuse. In the entertainment industry, Jiang Liga, the third wife, unexpectedly bound the good pregnancy continuation system. As long as she goes to the 3,000 worlds to give birth to a son for the male protagonist who has lost his heir, she can use 10 billion yuan to achieve rebirth. At the beginning, Jiang Li's sister can't even resist menstrual pain. Now you want me to have a child? Don't even think about it. After learning that completing the task, you can receive 10 billion yuan of Jiang Li help. Help me up. World 1. Crazy criticism of an Heirless Tyrant versus a petite and soft little eunuch. The tyrant has been feeling a lot of headaches lately. He found himself having an inappropriate thought towards the petite and soft little eunuch in the imperial study. Just as he followed his inner efforts to bend himself, he realized that the eunuch was actually a daughter. The tyrant was furious and fiercely blocked the eunuch in the corner of the wall. World 2. Disliking emperors versus wives of power officials. The emperor of Dian dynasty suffered from a strange disease, and he was not allowed to have any contact with the opposite sex except for the empress dowager. He thought he would live a lonely life until he grew old, but to his surprise, this delicate and tender day fell into his arms, causing ripples in his heart. Keywords of the novel. Jiao1 waste essence good for pregnancy. Extinct male lead difficulty no pop-ups. Jiao1 waste essence good for pregnancy. Extinct male lead difficulty complete collection download. Jiao1 waste essence good for pregnancy. Extinct male lead difficulty latest chapter reading. Chapter 1. Crazy criticism of the Heirless Tyrant versus the petite and soft young eunuch. 01. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1. Crazy criticism of the Heirless Tyrant versus the petite and soft young eunuch. 01. Jiang Liga is gone. As a hard-working third wife in the entertainment industry, she went straight to bed after staying up for several big nights. At the moment when the sky and earth are spinning, Jiang Li's face shows unwillingness. My movie queen, my money. Damn thief, why did you treat me like this? Rumble, the roar in my heart had just fallen, and a thunderbolt surged in. Jiang Li hesitated for a second, and the remaining soul covered its head and trembled. Wrong, wrong. I was wrong. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness, is that okay? In the next moment, the surging thunder above her head gradually dissipated, and Jiang Li's remaining soul covered her head, causing her to close her eyes. Ding, hello host, welcome to the Haoyun Lianlian system. I am the system assistant Duo Zidwafu. Jiang Li was clever and quickly opened her eyes. Who is speaking? As soon as she opened her eyes, a small Zheng Tai wearing a suit caught her eye. Xiao Zheng Tai, who was about 3 or 4 years old, was looking at him with a tight face. Hello host, welcome to the Haoyun Lianlian system. I am the system assistant Duo Zidwafu. Jiang Li's remaining soul lay on the ground, blinking and saying, good luck keeps coming. What are you doing? The host's task is to travel to 3,000 worlds to continue the inheritance of the extinct male protagonist, inherit the hegemony, and have a good pregnancy. Jiang Li's mouth twitched and said, the bagpipes come from afar. After completing the task, the host can be reborn. Jiang Li's eyes lit up and she said, no, what did you just say? Prolonged offspring. I can do it, I can do it. In addition, the host also needs to seek revenge for the original body and eliminate its resentment value. Jiang Li, is this also considered a task? System. How can it not be counted? Jiang Li's mind flashed through the novels and scripts she had read, and she shook her head in an instant. Still calculate, calculate. After completing the task, the host can receive 10 billion. The system didn't give Jiang Li a chance to finish speaking and threw a big move. Jiang Li coughed suddenly and said, help. Help me up. The system gentleman extended his hand and pulled up Jiang Li's remaining soul. May I ask if the host is willing to contract with the system? Willing. Jiang Li nodded without hesitation. Any hesitation for a second would be disrespectful to 10 billion yuan. In Luo, a virtual screen appeared in front of Jiang Li, with 2 buttons flashing on the screen. Yes or no. Jiang Li raised her hand and pressed yes. Congratulations on the successful contract between the host and the Good Pregnancy Lianlian system. Next, please claim the beginner village gift pack with 1000 points. The potions in the mall can be purchased with points, and the host can earn corresponding points for each small world task completed. As soon as the words fell, a shopping mall page appeared on the virtual screen in front of Jiang Li. Birth Series. Birth Potions, 50 points, Birth Potions, 50 points, Twins Potions, 100 points, Dragon and Phoenix Potions, 150 points, False Pregnancy Potions, 50 points, Painless Childbirth Potions, 100 points. Buff Boost Series. Ultimate Beauty Card, 80 points, Poison Free Card, 80 points, Infinite Strength Card, 80 points, Lucky Explosion Card, 80 points. Jiang Li glanced at the page in front of her and then clicked a few times on the screen. The Peerless Beauty Card, the Poison Proof Card, the Infinite Power Card, and the Lucky Explosion Card have been issued. Please check and receive them. Shwa 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 shwa, several golden lights suddenly appeared, and cards with different attributes instantly disappeared into Jiang Li's body. As the male lead's favorability increases, the host can earn corresponding points. Only when the male lead's favorability reaches 50% can they conceive offspring. At that time, the host can exchange fertility potions based on their needs. The system explained the rules to Jiang Li and then waved his hand. Is the host ready? Let's go. After a whirlwind, Jiang Li's figure was enveloped by a white light. Yoho, the stinky newcomer dares to resist. Fu Gong, in my opinion, he just owes me a lesson. Who in the palace dares to oppose you, Fu Gong? It's just that the new one doesn't understand the rules at all. Before Jiang Li could open her eyes, she heard a constant buzzing in her ear. She frowned and slowly opened her eyes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I saw 5 pairs of eyes staring at her tightly. Jiang Li was startled and suddenly widened her eyes. Yo, little trash, woke up. As she opened her eyes, the leader put their hands around their chests and made sarcastic remarks. Jiang Li slightly observed the scene in front of her and found that she was curled up in a corner, while the 5 people with unkind faces in front of her were all dressed in father-in-law attire. Is she being bullied by eunuchs? Jiang Li was about to get up when the pain on her body made her fall back with a thud. She quickly supported the ground with her arms, lowered her head, and realized that she was also wearing a eunuch uniform. Jiang Li. Isn't it about conquering the male lead? How can she perform as a eunuch in her attire? Xializi, today my father-in-law will give you a small lesson. If you dare not follow the rules in the future, don't blame my father-in-law for being impolite to you. The leader, Duke Fu, pinched his orchid finger and looked down at Jiang Li, who was lying paralyzed on the ground. After warning, he waved his hand and the eunuch beside him quickly brought the brewed tea to Jiang Li. Here, go and deliver this tea to the imperial study. Zhang Gonggang is feeling unwell today, so you can take his place to serve his majesty. Fu Gonggang bent over and leaned in front of Jiang Li, his slender eyes narrowing into a slit. What should be said and what should not be said, shouldn't I teach you? Before Jiang Li could react, Grandpa Fu grabbed her arm and pulled her up, then forcefully stuffed the tray containing tea into her hand. Why don't you go to the imperial study to serve? If it delays you, you won't even have enough heads to chop. Fu Gonggang gave Jiang Li a bad tone and urged her to quickly go to the imperial study to serve her. Jiang Li, who had just come through and had not yet regained consciousness, was entrusted with a heavy responsibility and walked towards the direction of the imperial study with a bewildered expression, holding tea. Watching her leave, Zhang Gonggang, who was feeling unwell, quickly bowed and thanked Fu Gonggang. Thank you very much for saving his life. Today it was Duke Zhang's turn to be on duty, but Duke Zhang heard that His Majesty had a great fire when he went to court. The Emperor is angry, and floating corpses are everywhere. Their Majesty's temperament is inherently unpredictable, and considering the fate of other princes, Duke Zhang dared not approach His Majesty at this time. So I found Grandpa Fu and begged him to help me avoid this calamity and save my life. Fu Gonggang naturally turned his attention to the new receiver, Xiaolizi, and asked him to serve in front of His Majesty on behalf of Zhang Gonggang. Xiaolizi, who was timid in nature, rejected Duke Fu for the first time, which led to the scene of eunuch bullying just now. Jiang Li arrived at the imperial study with a tray in her hand, feeling the chill that could freeze people to death in the hall. She lowered her head and gritted her scalp to come to the jade table where the emperor was located. Previously, Jiang Li had also served in the imperial study twice. Based on his memory, Jiang Li knelt down in front of the jade table and picked up a teapot to pour tea for the emperor. The injury on her arm made her hand shake uncontrollably, and tea was instantly spilled on the emperor's hand. Brush, the air in the imperial study instantly solidifies. Even Duke Su, who had been serving the emperor all along, couldn't help but hold his breath. There is only one thought in my heart. It's over. I'm here, I'm glad to meet you in this book. This article belongs to Xiao Oceanwen, and I hope you will like it. Also, please collect and ask for tickets. Do you love me? End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Crazy Criticism of a Tyrant Without Inheritance versus a Pretty and Soft Eunuch, 02. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2. Crazy Criticism of a Tyrant Without Inheritance versus a Pretty and Soft Eunuch, 02. The people in the imperial study desperately lowered their heads to reduce their sense of presence, fearing that it would harm the fish pond. In a fit of anger, His Majesty chopped off their heads. Jiang Li was also confused, and her hand holding the teapot was still trembling. No, isn't it? Just as I came through, I was about to get my head chopped off. Help me, help me, help me. Jiang Li screamed wildly in her heart, her hands frozen in mid-air trembling for a long time without daring to retract them. The atmosphere of arrow and crossbow tension in the TV series, she now truly experienced it. The vast imperial study was completely silent, and needles could be heard falling. The eyelashes of Emperor Song Chengyin of the Northern Moon Kingdom drooped like crow feathers, leaving a shallow shadow under his eyes. He sat in front of the jade table, his expression calm and majestic, his pitch black and golden imperial robe hanging on the ground, and no one could understand his thoughts. Just as Jiang Li thought this little world was about to end, Song Chengyin's voice sounded above her head. Raise your head. The low voice made Jiang Li's scalp tingle, and she quickly put down the kettle and gave a formal salute. Your Majesty, please calm down. I didn't mean to do it. Jiang Li knelt on the ground and kowtowed firmly to Song Chengyin. Raise your head. Song Chengyin repeated what he had just said. Jiang Li swallowed her saliva and lifted her head, trembling and stiff. This emperor is really beautiful. This was the first thought that came to Jiang Li's mind after seeing Song Chengyin's appearance. The man exuded an innate sense of luxury all over his body, with a pair of peach blossom eyes slightly raised. His eyes were pitch black like night, like an ancient well with no waves, exuding a cold and thin chill. His thin lips were as red as blood, sparkling with allure, tempting all living beings. Jiang Li's gaze paused on his face for a few seconds, and in the afterglow, he caught a glimpse of everyone in the imperial study bowing their heads and trembling their shoulders before realizing it. Looking directly at Tianyan was a heinous crime of beheading. Jiang Li's back stiffened and she quickly averted her gaze. Just as she was about to lower her head, a well-defined hand pinched her chin. Jiang Li's pupils contracted and he was forced to gaze at Song Chengyin. Song Chengyin looked at Jiang Li and his narrow peach blossom eyes narrowed slightly. Do even eunuchs look so magnificent these days? Her slender fingers pinched Jiang Li's chin and twisted her head left and right. As her head shook left and right, Jiang Li's beautiful apricot eyes also began to turn. Just as everyone thought that Song Chengyin would be furious over Jiang Li's mistake, he chuckled lightly. "What's your name?" "Slave, servant little pair." "Xializi," Song Chengyin said after reciting her name repeatedly, "I'll stay in the imperial study to serve you in the future." Jiang Liqiang suppressed her astonishment and quickly lowered her eyes to express gratitude, saying, "Yes, yes. Thank you very much for your kindness, Your Majesty." Song Chengyin released Jiang Li's chin and then picked up the bamboo slips on the jade table again. I saw several lines of writing seeping out from the wet bamboo slip. Jiang Li was mistaken this time because she unintentionally exposed the secret on the bamboo slips. Otherwise, her recent actions would have been heavily punished even if she didn't lose her head. As Song Chengyin lowered his gaze to look at the bamboo slips, Su Gonggang behind him desperately winked at Jiang Li. "Signal her to wipe off the tea stains that spilled on the jade table, and then add a new cup of tea for Song Chengyin." Jiang Li understood Su Gonggang's suggestion and quickly took out a handkerchief from his sleeve. He maintained a kneeling position and straightened his waist, reaching out to wipe the tea stains on the jade table. The delicate and slender fingers wandered back and forth under Song Chengyin's eyelids. Song Chengyin paused as he looked at the bamboo slips and couldn't help but look towards the hand in front of him. How could a eunuch in the palace have such delicate hands? Strange, strange. Song Chengyin's gaze shifted from Jiang Li's hand to her head. At this moment, she was wiping the tea stains on the jade table with her head down, kneeling there with a little one, which was more lively than the others. When Jiang Li wiped off the tea stains on the jade table and refilled the teacups, Song Chengyin withdrew his gaze. Jiang Li was about to step down when Song Chengyin spoke up, "Do you know how to study ink?" Jiang Li instinctively looked up at him, then quickly lowered her head after meeting those deep eyes. "Your Majesty, only then can I study ink." Song Chengyin gave a faint nod, then set the bamboo slips aside and picked up the wolf hair on the brush mountain to signal Jiang Li to grind ink. Jiang Li quickly knelt and moved forward, approaching the jade table to start grinding ink, fearing that her slow movements would displease the emperor. In the world of imperial power, pinching her as a eunuch is as simple as pinching an ant. After finishing the ink study, Jiang Li withdrew her body and forced herself to kneel back to the side, waiting quietly for Song Chengyin's orders. Song Chengyin picked up the wolf hair and reviewed the memorial, while Jiang Li bowed his head and secretly complained to the system roast. "Isn't it about conquering the male lead? How did he teleport me to a little eunuch? Does the male lead have a special hobby? System lost. The teleportation was too urgent. I forgot to introduce the background of this small world to the host. It is true that other system assistants have already successfully contracted the host, and only this good pregnancy system has been idle. The system assistant also has performance, and if the host tasks are completed excellently, the system assistant can also be upgraded. As the saying goes, an assistant who doesn't want to be a gold medal assistant is not a good assistant. Finally, a person who is willing to contract with it arrived. The system assistant was afraid that Jiang Li would turn back, so after a brief introduction, he quickly teleported her to the small world. I didn't even have time to introduce the background to her. Next, please let Xiao Duo introduce the background of this small world to the host. In this world, the host's identity is the illegitimate daughter of the governor of Qingzhou. Her biological mother died early, and in the mansion, she is a corner that the scumbag father does not love and the legitimate mother does not love. Emperor Song Chengyin of the Northern Moon Kingdom had 3,000 beautiful women in his harem, but none of them were able to give birth to offspring. The issue of offspring was related to the stability of the country, and the officials and courtiers were so anxious that they tried various methods. Even the master calculated the emperor's birth date and 8 characters, and then predicted the 8 characters that matched the emperor. Any girl who matched these birth dates and 8 characters would be sent to the palace, and the birth date of the host's eldest sister Jiang Ji happens to be on this list. Some people want to fly up to the branches and become phoenixes, while others don't want to waste their entire lives in the deep palace. Jiang Ji is one of those unwilling people. After learning that she was going to enter the palace, Jiang Ji cried all day and even forced her to die. The governor and his wife couldn't bear to watch their daughter suffer such a crime, but the imperial decree had been issued and there was no reason to retract it. Therefore, the two of them came up with the idea of stealing a beam and changing pillars. Jiang Li snorted coldly in her heart and said, "Is this a way to have a concubine enter the palace on behalf of her eldest sister?" That's right, the host was drugged and sent into the palace. Since she is the concubine who entered the palace to become the emperor, why has her body become a fake eunuch again? End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Crazy criticism of a tyrant without inheritance versus a pretty and soft eunuch, 03. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. Crazy criticism of a tyrant without inheritance versus a pretty and soft eunuch, 03. When she woke up, she found herself already in the palace. Like Jiang Ji, she didn't like the prison in the deep palace, so she changed into eunuch clothes and planned to find an opportunity to escape from the palace. In the end, he failed to escape and was mistaken for a true eunuch, so the situation developed into the present one. Jiang Li. The person has already arrived at the deep palace, where is there a chance to escape from the cage? However, her current status as a eunuch has made her very embarrassed. The person who wants to conquer this small world is the emperor. How can a eunuch use her hands and feet? I'm afraid I was pulled down and beheaded before I even stepped forward. Jiang Li felt a bit discouraged. She knelt for too long and her knees hurt. She twisted her body uncomfortable. Song Chengyin, who was reviewing the memorial, caught a glimpse of her movements and found the young eunuch more and more interesting. Who dares to twist his body in front of the emperor? Is he probably the first person? Song Chengyin raised his eyebrows and said lightly, "Get up and wait." Jiang Li felt relieved and kowtowed to Song Chengyin, "Thank you very much, Your Majesty." The male lead's favorability has increased to 3%. The sound of the system came from her mind, and Jiang Li was somewhat surprised. For a moment, she couldn't figure out where Song Chengyin's liking came from. Does this emperor have a tendency to be abused? Did she just scald him with tea and make him feel good about him? Thinking about this, Jiang Li's mouth twitched. It was simply off the mark. Watching Jiang Liquid behind him with one's own eyes, the other people waiting in the imperial study showed shock on all sides. This young father-in-law spilled tea on His Majesty's hand, committing a great crime of offending the emperor. Not only did Your Majesty not punish him, but he also showed compassion for him and made him stand up. Your Majesty, what's wrong with you today? Why did he suddenly become understanding when he was still calm just now? Indeed, it is a needle in the depths of the emperor's heart. Not only the eunuchs couldn't figure it out, but even Duke Su, who served beside Song Chengyin, couldn't figure out the reason for it for a while. Fortunately, the anger that His Majesty had just ignited in the morning court had dissipated, and their hearts that had been hanging could finally breathe a little sigh of relief. Jiang Li stayed in the imperial study for 2 hours, maintaining a posture that made her dizzy. The tasks in the palace are really not easy to handle. No wonder her eldest sister was searching for life and death when she heard that she was going to enter the palace. After completing the memorial, Song Chengyin left the imperial study, and Jiang Li returned to the Imperial Academy with the tray he had brought when he arrived. As soon as I walked to the door, I heard Fu Gonggang and his companions discussing themselves. These 2 hours have passed, and Xiaolizi hasn't returned from the Imperial study yet. Shouldn't he have been beheaded? Zhang Gonggang went to Jiang Li's room and hurriedly arrived in front of Fu Gonggang when he saw that the room was empty. Fu Gong was just and leisurely chewing on melon seeds. His godfather was the Grand Duke next to the Empress Dowager. With this relationship, he was lazy in the imperial household department, distributing all his work to others. Unfortunately, others dared to be angry and didn't dare to speak up. In order to make things better in the Imperial Academy, they all rushed to curry favor with Duke Fu. Zhang Gonggang approached Fu Gonggang, took the melon seed skin from his hand, and looked at him with a pleasing expression on his face. Fu Gonggang, you said that Xializi hasn't returned yet, shouldn't something have happened? If he were to confess his servant in a hurry, then. Fu Gonggang glanced at him and snorted coldly, what are you afraid of? If Xializi, that useless person, really dares to confess you, why don't I just ask my godfather to mediate? Zhang Gongdang's eyes lit up, just waiting for his words. Yes, yes, what Duke Fu said is yes, thank you very much, Duke Fu. Faced with the flattery of Duke Zhang, Duke Fu was very helpful. He pinched his orchid finger and took out a handkerchief to wipe off the dust on his hands, saying, Little Easy, that useless person, I dare not chew his tongue in front of his majesty. If he really dares to chew his tongue in front of his majesty, it would be best if he were executed first. Otherwise, when he comes back, you see, I won't skin him. As soon as they finished speaking, a light mockery came from behind them. Yo, Grandpa Fu has such great abilities. Those who dare to surpass His Majesty and deal with His Majesty's people think that Grandpa Fu is the emperor sitting on that dragon chair. As soon as this voice came out, Duke Fu and Duke Zhang shuddered coldly, their necks stiff and twisted their heads. Seeing Jiang Li standing in front of them intact, their pupils trembled and their eyes widened in disbelief. You, how did you come back? They heard that His Majesty was furious this morning, so it was Zhang Gonggang, who was on duty at the Imperial Study today, who tried his best to evade the situation, fearing that he might be unlucky and have to go or come back. In the eyes of Duke Fu and Duke Zhang, Jiang Li is the replacement for Duke Zhang today. They have already assumed that Jiang Li will be executed by His Majesty, but to their surprise, Jiang Li not only returned but also remained unharmed. Jiang Li walked into the officialdom with a tray in her hand. At that moment, her figure appeared, and other knowledgeable people also gathered together. I looked at her up and down in shock. Zhang Gonggang circled around Jiang Li in disbelief. After confirming that she was unharmed, he came to Jiang Li's body and looked at her steadily. You came back just right. Fu Gong, who had already put down his bold words and wanted to peel off a layer of ginger pear, walked up to her in 3 or 2 steps, pinching his waist with one hand and pointing his finger at her face, looking extremely arrogant. Say, have you said anything in front of your Majesty that shouldn't be said? Jiang Li grabbed the finger in front of her and then forcefully broke it off. Ah! Fu Gong's face stiffened, and then the roaring voice of a lion from the east of the river rang out. The sudden situation frightened everyone, and they suddenly widened their eyes in disbelief as they looked at Jiang Li. This is that submissive little pair. Fu Gong, didn't anyone tell you that holding fingers is impolite? As Jiang Li spoke, he increased his strength in his hands. Fu Gong's face was contorted with pain and he roared, Release it, you release it for me. Jiang Li snorted coldly and deliberately pushed Fu Gonggang as she let go. Bang! Fu Gonggang's obese body fell to the ground with a loud roar, lifting up a cloud of mud and dust. Jiang Li looked at her hand incredulously and said, Oh, how strong is it? Then she's not afraid. Thinking about this, Jiang Li stepped forward and stepped on Grandpa Fu's chest, pretending to be his chest and kicking him. Fu Gonggang's face turned pale and he almost vomited blood. You. Fu Gonggang fell to the ground, his fingers trembling as he pointed towards Jiang Li. Jiang Li squinted her eyes and said, Can't understand human language. Today, I'll teach you how to be a good person. Jiang Li lifted her foot and pressed Grandpa Fu's hand onto the ground. She turned her ankle and forcefully kicked him away a few times. With a click, a crisp sound of bone cracking sounded, and Grandpa Fu's painful eyes bulged. The deafening cries of pain instantly startled the birds perched on the tree. Ah! The crowd who were stunned in place were also pulled back to their thoughts by this painful cry. They stared intently at Jiang Li, who was exceptionally fierce in front of them, for a moment unsure of what action to take. Bang bang. Jiang Li took the opportunity to punch and kick Grandpa Fu, and returned all the pain she had suffered this morning to him. Fu Gonggang curled up in pain, reduced to being slaughtered by the people on the chopping board. What are you still doing in a daze? Are you all dead? Fu Gonggang was also stunned by the sudden transformation of Jiang Li. After regaining his senses, he quickly shouted at everyone at the top of his throat. Everyone swallowed their saliva and quickly stepped forward to stop it. Just then, Jiang Li turned back and looked at everyone with a sharp gaze. I am the first class father.in.law appointed by His Majesty to be on duty in the imperial study. If you dare to touch me, give me a try. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Crazy criticism of the Heirless Tyrant versus the delicate body and soft body of the little eunuch, 04. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. Chapter 4. Crazy criticism of the Heirless Tyrant versus the delicate body and soft body of the little eunuch, 04. Everyone's tiger body trembled, first.class father.in.law. Little Lizzie was unexpectedly promoted by His Majesty to be a first.class father.in.law. The crowd who had originally intended to come forward to stop suddenly stopped moving, and a sudden break froze in place, grateful that their movements were not fast enough to touch Jiang Li. Xializi is now a first.class father.in.law. They can't afford to provoke anyone. Everyone had clear eyes and clear hearts, and no matter how much Duke Fu shouted, he did not step forward to interfere with the grudges between the two of them. Jiang Li gave Grandpa Fu a few more hard kicks, and only took them back when he was tired from beating him. He stood in front of Grandpa Fu and looked down at him from a high position. Fu Gong, how should I be a person? I don't think I need to continue teaching you, do I? Xiao, Li, Zi, wait for me. Fu Gonggang was curled up on the ground in a disheveled state, with only one mouth remaining hard from top to bottom. Jiang Li raised her eyebrows and said, all right, the day is long, and I will wait for Grandpa Fu well. After finishing speaking, Jiang Li flicked her sleeve and walked towards her room with her hands behind her back. Everyone looked at each other and quickly followed with a pleasing expression on their faces. Although Fu Gongang's godfather was on duty in front of the Empress Dowager, it can be said that he was actually Fu Gongang's godfather, not Fu Gonggang himself. But Xializi is different. Xializi has now caught your Majesty's eye, but she is on duty in front of your Majesty. If one day Xializi can speak a good word for them in front of His Majesty, then thinking about this, everyone instantly became excited. Xializi, what did you do in the imperial study that caught your Majesty's eye? Xializi, does the injury on your arm still hurt? Are you hungry, Xializi? Everyone's thoughts were lively, and the object of flattery instantly changed from Duke Fu to Jiang Li. Jiang Li couldn't resist the enthusiasm of the crowd and was surrounded by a group of people as she returned to the room, completely ignoring the ironclad faces of Duke Zhang and Duke Fu. Watching the crowd leave, Zhang Gonggang gritted his teeth in hatred. Damn it! He went to the imperial study because he had taken my name, but he was feeling proud. Watching Jiang Li being crowded by the crowd, Zhang Gonggang gritted his teeth in hatred. If it weren't for Xializi taking his place in the imperial study, how could he have been personally promoted to first.class father.in.law by His Majesty? Everything Xializi has now is his. Zhang Gonggang clenched his fists and spoke with anger in his voice, today is clearly my duty, and Xializi was promoted to first.class Gonggang because he took advantage of my reputation. I cannot let him take such an advantage for nothing. Fu Gong remained silent, his eyes fixed on the crowd ahead as if he had been poisoned. Damn it! Li Diffi swore not to be a human without avenging him. Fu Gong twisted his body in anger, and the pain on his body made his face look grim again. Ouch! What are you still doing in a daze? Hurry up and help the others up. Yes, please be careful, Fu Gong. Zhang Gonggang has always been Fu Gongang's henchman, and now everyone is trying to curry favor with Jiangli, leaving him alone to guard Fu Gongang's side. After struggling to help Grandpa Fu up from the ground, Grandpa Zhang was already exhausted. He gasped for breath and said to Duke Fu, "Tomorrow I will go to the imperial kitchen to be on duty and reclaim my own position." The next day, Jiangli was about to go to the imperial study when he was stopped by Fu Gonggang, who was wrapped in gauze and leaning on a cane. In eunuch bullying, Duke Fu can be said to be the leader. 1/3 of the resentment on the original body comes from the Fugong in front of him. Jiangli looked coldly at Grandpa Fu, who was blocking in front of him, and said, "What does Grandpa Fu mean?" "I went to the imperial study on duty according to your Majesty's orders, which delayed the time. Can you bear it?" Fu Gonggang stared at her with hatred and said, "Go to the imperial study and be on duty. Don't have your dreams of spring and autumn. Yesterday, you were promoted by His Majesty only after taking on Zhang Gonggang's class. After all, this identity belongs to Zhang Gonggang. You are still the lowest status eunuch. Where do you have the qualifications to play tricks like other families here? Xiaolizi, please wait for me. Yesterday's revenge, I will definitely repay you 100 times and 1,000 times. The days ahead are long, and I have some tricks to trick you. Please let me bear it well." Fu Gonggang instinctively made a gesture of holding his finger at Jiang Li's nose, but the pain on his body made it impossible for him to lift his hand. He took a cold breath as he felt the pain from a slight movement. Upon hearing that Duke Zhang had already gone to the imperial study, Jiang Li raised her eyebrows and cursed a fool in her heart. Since someone is rushing to seek death, she has no reason to stop them. Jiang Li turned around and picked up a tool to continue her previous cleaning work. Looking at Jiang Li's hard-working appearance, Grandpa Fu let out a cold snort. Dare to be arrogant in front of him. He has a way to govern and dress up. On the other side, Zhang Gonggang happily arrived at the imperial study. Unlike his previous trembling mood, he now arrived at the imperial study as if he had come to his own home, with a strong sense of belonging. In the future, this will be his place of employment. He transformed from a eunuch who worked as a sweeper to a first-class father-in-law serving beside His Majesty, which he dared not even dream of. But now it has actually happened. As soon as Zhang Gonggang thought of himself as the person who would be flattered by the stars in the Imperial Academy, he couldn't help but chuckle. The others looked at him like ghosts. What is the imperial study, and how dare you laugh? There are really no rules. After noticing everyone's gaze, Zhang Gonggang, who was ecstatic, quickly restrained his smile and waited patiently on the side, waiting for His Majesty's arrival. After arriving at the imperial study just now, he had already inquired. Yesterday, Xiaolizi was mainly responsible for pouring tea and grinding ink for His Majesty in the imperial study. Today, he replaced Xiaolizi to regain his original identity. Zhang Gonggang thought happily, even his waist straightened a bit. "See Your Majesty." The sound of palace people bowing came from outside the door of the imperial study, followed by the tall figure of Song Chengyin walking in from outside. At the moment he appeared, the temperature in the imperial study suddenly dropped. "See Your Majesty." Zhang Gonggang and other palace attendants on duty in the imperial study knelt down and knocked their heads to the ground. Song Chengyin walked straight towards the dragon chair, and the young father-in-law following behind quickly placed the memorial in his arms on the jade table. "Research Inc." Song Chengyin calmly uttered 2 words, and Zhang Gonggang, who was kneeling on the ground, quickly stepped forward. At the moment when his rough palms appeared under Song Chengyin's eyelids, he gave a faint glance. "Where did Xiaolizi, who was on duty yesterday, go?" "Your Majesty, yesterday I was supposed to be on duty as a servant in Japan, but I was feeling unwell and worried that I might not be able to serve properly on time. That's why Xiaolizi took on the servant's duties. Today, my servant's body is safe and sound, so I exchanged positions with Xiaolizi. Xiaolizi should be doing sweeping affairs in the Chongda Hall now." Zhang Gonggang explained the reasons that had been arranged long ago. He thought he could pass the exam and stay in the imperial study to serve smoothly, but Song Chengyin frowned after listening to his words. Exchange positions. A cold voice echoed above Grandpa Zhang's head, making him tremble with fear. Yes, yes. He is the person appointed by me to stay in the imperial study to serve. Who allowed you to exchange positions without authorization? As soon as these words were spoken, the person kneeling on the ground lowered their head, afraid of being implicated by Zhang Gonggang, a self-righteous fool. Zhang Gonggang didn't expect the scene in front of him, so he was so scared that he kept kowtowing and saying, "Your Majesty, calm down. Your Majesty, calm down. I thought Xiaolizi was in my class yesterday, so." Song Chengyin had a hint of coldness in his eyes and said, "So you're just going against the grain and taking my words for granted." Zhang Gonggang was greatly alarmed and said, "Slaves, slaves, and I dare not. I knew I was wrong, it's me. Dragging him down, will take 100 responsibilities." Zhang Gonggang was so careful that Song Chengyin could see through it at a glance. He didn't give him a chance to argue, so he was dragged down by others. Your Majesty's servant has made a mistake. I beg your Majesty not to do so." Before Zhang Gong could finish speaking, his mouth was blocked and he was mercilessly dragged down. Song Chengyin pinched his brow and said, "Go and call Xiaolizi over." End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Crazy Criticism of a Tyrant Without Inheritance versus a Pretty and Soft Eunuch, 05. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5. Crazy Criticism of a Tyrant Without Inheritance versus a Pretty and Soft Eunuch, 05. When Song Chengyin sent his father-in-law to Chengde Hall, Jiangli was sweeping the courtyard. New eunuchs usually do sweeping work throughout the palace, leaving them to do all the dirty and tiring work. Fu Gongong is considered an old man in the palace, who has been in the palace for some years. In addition, he has a godfather who is on duty next to the noble consort, and now he can be called a third-class duke. The third-class duke is mainly responsible for arranging work for the people below him on weekdays, so the eunuchs in charge of the ritual do not dare to offend him. I'm afraid that Grandpa Fu will secretly put on small shoes for them and arrange endless dirty and tiring work for them. Today, Jiang Li's confrontation touched Grandpa Fu's mold, and he is now being monitored and working by Grandpa Fu. This side, and that piece are all tasks you need to complete today. If you can't finish them, don't even think about eating. Fu Gonggang pinched his waist with one hand and pointed his orchid finger at Jiangli with the other, arrogantly and openly seeking revenge. The eunuchs sweeping aside looked at each other and sighed in their hearts. I'm afraid Xiaolizi will suffer from offending Grandpa Fu in the future. At this moment, a voice came from behind the crowd. Where is Grandpa Xiaolizi? Subconsciously, everyone followed the sound and quickly lowered their heads when they saw the attire symbolizing a first-class eunuch on the newcomer's body. I dare not even speak out loud. Upon seeing the newcomer, Grandpa Fu quickly burst into laughter and approached him with a pleasing expression on his face. May I ask if Grandpa has any instructions? Did Xiaolizi make a mistake? Don't worry, Grandpa. Just leave the small matter of punishing the servant to the miscellaneous family. How can I trouble Grandpa to personally take action? My father-in-law frowned and said, Who are you? The one I'm looking for is little Lizzie. What are you talking about here? Fu Gongang's face stiffened, and his hand hanging on his side tightened slightly. Due to the identity of the person in front of him, he dared not have any displeasure on his face and could only sneer and say, yes, yes. The miscellaneous family is a third-class father-in-law, and the new father-in-law from the Imperial Household Department is under the jurisdiction of the miscellaneous family. No matter where you go, you must first report to the miscellaneous family. The implication is that he is Xiaolizi's superior, and if you want to find Xiaolizi, you need to ask him first. Unexpectedly, after Duke Fu reported his identity, the first-class grandfather didn't even pay attention and gave him a faint glance. I have been ordered by your majesty to come and find Duke Xiaolizi to be on duty in the imperial study. Why, you also need to inquire about your majesty's affairs. Fu Gongong's face turned green and purple, his expression constantly changing. It was extremely exciting. No, 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 no. My father-in-law misunderstood. Fu Gongong quickly waved his hand and took off his hat of disdain for imperial power. Even if he had 10 heads, he wouldn't be able to chop them off. Don't dare to move away quickly. The people who can serve the emperor are all like human spirits. How could they not see that Duke Fu is deliberately targeting Xiaolizi? Since Xiaolizi Gongong is the person appointed by His Majesty, he doesn't mind selling his personal feelings to embarrass those who target him everywhere. Unable to come down from the stage after being scolded in person, even if Fu Gong was unwilling in his heart, he could only obediently step aside and dare not completely offend the first-class father-in-law in front of him. With a cold snort from my father-in-law, I stopped talking to Grandpa Fu and walked straight towards Jiangli. Jiangli, who was petite in stature, was now carrying a wooden bucket to water the flowers in front of the garden. The water in the bucket was too full and splashed out with the turbulence. Jiangli's shoes and clothes were all wet, making her look disheveled. Oh my dear little pair, let go quickly, really, how could you do such a heavy job? The father-in-law sent by Song Chengyin hurriedly approached Jiangli, pinching his orchid finger in excitement and breaking his throat. Jiangli put down the wooden barrel and looked at the person in confusion, saying, "Who is my father-in-law?" The miscellaneous family was sent by His Majesty to summon Duke Xiaolizi to go to the imperial study on duty. Duke Xiaolizi can call me Duke Mao. Duke Mao first introduced himself to Jiangli and then explained his purpose of coming to her. Your Majesty is looking for me. Jiangli looked shocked. But isn't Grandpa Zhang already on duty in the imperial study? Speaking of Duke Zhang, Duke Mao sneered lightly. Someone who thinks they are replacing Duke Xiaolizi's job has already been dragged down and punished. Xiaolizi Gongong, your Majesty is still waiting in the imperial study. Let's leave now. If the delay on the way is too long and causes your Majesty's displeasure, I can't afford it. Mao Gongong grabbed Jiangli's arm and pulled her towards the imperial study. In the end, Jiangli didn't even bother to change her wet clothes and hurried to the imperial study with Duke Mao. On the way, they encountered an unwelcome guest, who was none other than Zhang Gongong, who had just been beaten. Zhang Gongong suffered 100 major setbacks and almost lost his life. Now he is lying on a stretcher being carried by 2 young eunuchs. As he is wearing a navy blue eunuch uniform, there are no visible bloodstains, but his buttocks and back clothes are wet, and as soon as he approaches, he can smell a strong smell of blood. Zhang Gongong lay on the stretcher with a disfigured face, his voice hoarse during the execution, and now he can't make a sound. Duke Mao. After seeing Duke Mao and Jiangli approaching, the 2 eunuchs stopped and greeted each other in a proper manner. Mao Gongong glanced at Zhang Gongong lying on the stretcher and waved his hand, saying, "Carry it away, it's really unlucky." Yes. 2 eunuchs hurriedly carried stretchers and walked forward. Mao Gongong turned his head to look at Jiangli and said to her, "Xiaolizi Gongong, that's Zhang Gongong who thought he was going to the imperial study this morning to replace you." After hearing the 3 words, Xiaolizi, Zhang Gongong, who was already half dead on the stretcher, suddenly opened his eyes and turned his head to look behind him. After seeing the familiar figure, he suddenly gritted his teeth. Xiao, Li, Zi. Wait for me, the humiliation I suffered today will surely be recovered from you one day, one by one. Zhang Gongong attributed all the crimes he suffered today to Jiangli. He swore not to be a human without this revenge. Jiangli didn't even know that Grandpa Zhang had already hated her, but even if Grandpa Zhang didn't trouble her, she would personally come to him to collect debts. Your Majesty, little pair Grandpa is here. After successfully taking the person to the imperial study, Duke Mao reported and then stood in his own position in a proper manner. Jiang Li walked up to the jade table and was about to kneel down to study ink when Song Chengyin, who was looking down to review the memorial, looked up at her. After seeing Jiang Li's soaked shoes and clothes, she squinted her eyes. Have you been bullied? End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Crazy Criticism of a Tyrant Without Inheritance versus a Pretty and Soft Eunuch, 06. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The source has no content or has errors. Chapter 7. Crazy Criticism of the Heirless Tyrant versus the Delicate Body and Soft Body of the Little Eunuch, 07. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7. Crazy Criticism of the Heirless Tyrant versus the Petite and Soft Body of the Little Eunuch, 07, Gudong. Jiang Li swallowed his saliva in frustration. She bit her lower lip tightly and reached out to Song Chengyin's pants with trembling hands. As she was about to grab the waist of her pants, she lowered her head tightly, leaving only a narrow slit in her eyes. Just as she was about to step forward and take off her pants with all her might, her feet were stirred by the loose palace uniform on her body. Puff! Jiang Li fell uncontrollably forward, panicking as she hurriedly searched for support and grabbed Song Chengyin's pants with both hands. With a thud, as she fell to the ground, Song Chengyin's pants were also stripped off. Your Majesty, please forgive me. Jiang Li quickly loosened Song Chengyin's pants as if he had grabbed a hot potato and knocked his head heavily on the ground to apologize. Song Chengyin furrowed his brows. Is he so terrifying? Looking at Jiang Li's trembling body, he said in a deep voice, lift your head up. Jiang Li dared not disobey the imperial decree, so she had to raise her head. The first thing that catches the eye is the slender and straight legs of the man, followed by the giant object between his legs. Jiang Li, who had never seen such a scene before, blushed with a blush, almost bleeding. At this moment, she didn't care about any imperial orders anymore. She quickly lowered her head and buried her head tightly on the ground. Song Chengyin lowered his head to look at himself, then glanced at Jiang Li kneeling in a small ball at his feet. Is this hurting one's self-esteem? After thinking of this possibility, Song Chengyin didn't bother Jiang Li anymore and turned towards the hot spring. With a thud, Jiang Li breathed a deep sigh of relief. This horse riding is too exciting. Host, calm down, calm down. The dormant system in Jiang Li's sea of consciousness was awakened by her rapid heartbeat. Jiang Li took a deep breath, and all that came to her mind was the terrifying scene she had just looked up to see. Truly, really big. Didn't even make the concubine pregnant. The tyrant suffered fundamental injuries during his early years of warfare, which led to the absence of offspring. However, the host can rest assured that if the system produces high-quality products, both the tyrant's people and the living will do well. Jiang Li. Song Chengyin soaked in a hot spring for about a stick of incense, and thought that Jiang Li might have hurt his self-esteem. He didn't ask Jiang Li to change his clothes anymore, but instead called for other father-in-law. As Song Chengyin walked out of the inner hall, Jiang Li, whose legs were already numb, could finally stand up. Returning to the heart-nourishing hall, Song Chengyin did not rest, but continued to sit in front of the jade table to review the memorial. The emperor didn't even sleep, and servants like Jiang Li had no reason to rest first. They could only open their eyes wide and muster up 12 points of energy to wait in the heart-nourishing hall, waiting for the emperor's orders. Jiang Li has become accustomed to staying up late, but she is not very tired at this point. In addition, the chill outside the window has hit her, making her feel completely drowsy. Rumble, accompanied by a chill, a muffled thunder suddenly descended from the sky. Looking at Song Chengyin, who had just finished bathing and was wearing thin clothes, Jiang Li looked around and finally saw the crimson-purple cloak on the nearby shelf. She quietly walked to the side and took off her cloak, then walked lightly behind Song Chengyin and bent down to drape the cloak over his broad shoulders. Your Majesty, It's cool at night, be careful not to get caught in the cold wind. As she approached, a faint pear fragrance penetrated Song Chengyin's nose. He instinctively turned his head to look, and his mind trembled as he met Jiang Li's watery apricot eyes. After being reminded by other father-in-law, Jiang Li had already wiped away the ink stains on her face with a handkerchief, but she couldn't wipe them all clean because she didn't have a mirror, and there was still a small piece left on her cheek. Looking at the ink stain on her cheek, Song Chenyin inexplicably extended his hand. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Crazy Criticism of a Tyrant Without Inheritance versus a Pretty and Soft Eunuch, 08. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8. Crazy Criticism of a Tyrant Without Inheritance versus a Pretty and Soft Eunuch, 08. He fingered Jiang Li's face and wiped away the ink stains on it. Jiang Li kept bending down, her eyes blinking as she looked at Song Chenyin, who was close by, feeling the warmth emanating from his fingertips. The soft touch on his fingers came, and Song Chenyin's eyes flickered slightly. It must be fun to pinch it, right? He thought and did the same. Song Chenyin pinched Jiang Li's chubby little face, causing her mouth to instantly pout together. Jiang Li pouted and stared at Song Chenyin with round eyes, full of resistance and reluctance to struggle. Song Chenyin found the little eunuch more amusing, so he ravaged her little face a few more times. Jiang Li took a cold breath in pain and Wei Chu Baba looked at him. Your Majesty, it hurts. Song Chenyin raised his eyebrows, knowing that he was not the kind of person who would accept adversity. If it were someone else, no matter how painful it is, I wouldn't dare to make a sound. Song Chenyin released his hand and saw several faint red marks appearing on Jiang Li's delicate face. Jiang Li rubbed her face and her pink lips pouted together again with her movements. Song Chenyin's gaze instinctively fell on her pink lips, and before he could see Jiang Li clearly, he straightened his waist. The male lead's favorability has increased again. The sound of the system's alarm came back from the brain. Jiang Li's eyes lit up with joy. How much? 8%. Jiang Li raised her eyebrows and said, oh, she seems to be able to understand the emperor's temperament now. He doesn't like people who accept adversity. It was her recent protest that made him develop a favorable impression of him. The sound of rain outside the window grew louder, and the other palace attendants waiting in the heart-nourishing hall quickly ran forward to close the window, isolating the coldness outside. Your Majesty, the Empress Dowager said she is feeling unwell and wants to see your Majesty. At this moment, a young eunuch hurriedly walked in from outside the door. Jiang Li raised her eyebrows and also heard of this noblewoman. After all, Duke Fu used to chatter in front of them all day long, and his godfather was on duty in front of the Empress Dowager, with great abilities. Are you feeling unwell? If you feel unwell, why do you seek medical attention from the imperial physician? Jiang Li silently rose in his heart, and then looked at Song Chenyin to see what he would do. Will you go to the Empress Dowager's palace or will you summon her to the heart-nourishing hall? However, Song Chenyin didn't even lift his head and said, if you're feeling unwell, go find the imperial physician. What did you do to see me? Jiang Li's eyes widened in amazement. Why did you steal her lines? Yes, yes. The father-in-law who was on duty outside the door had already bravely come in to convey the message. After hearing Song Chengyin's words, he turned around and walked out feeling relieved. Your Majesty did not like to hear about the Empress Dowager in the harem, but the people who came to pass the message were from the palace of the Empress Dowager. He dared not offend either side and had to risk being beheaded to come in and spread the message. Fortunately, Your Majesty did not lower the punishment, otherwise he would have been harmed by the Empress Dowager. The father-in-law had just taken a few steps when Song Chengyin's voice came from behind. My decree is that people in the harem are not allowed to step into the heart-nourishing hall for half a step in the future. Yes. The palace attendants in the hall quickly lowered their heads to respond. Behind her, Jiang Lihu looked at the man in front of her suspiciously. She had long heard the rumor that His Majesty had not set foot in the harem for 3 months. She thought it was a false rumor from the palace people, but now it seems to be true. Faced with such a blatant invitation, this guy refused without even lifting his head. After reviewing the last memorial, Song Chengyin stood up in front of the jade case. As the acting personal father-in-law, Jiang Li didn't want to follow directly. Song Chengyin arrived at the back of the dormitory and opened his arms. His father-in-law, who was responsible for changing his clothes, was about to step forward, but Jiang Li's movements were one step faster than him. Jiang Li first took off the cloak from Song Chengyin's body, then wrapped it around his waist from behind and clasped the leather around his waist with her jade hand. A faint pear fragrance came, and Song Chengyin, who had originally closed her eyes, slowly opened them. The smell on this eunuch is very pleasant. Jiang Li, who had experienced changing clothes once, didn't embarrass herself this time and quickly untied the scar on Song Chengyin's waist. She crossed Jinga onto her arm and continued to wrap around Song Chengyin to undress him. In front of the tall Song Chengyin, Jiang Li had just reached his chest. As she lowered her head to undress Song Chengyin, the latter lowered her gaze and looked at her head. At first, everything was normal, but just as Jiang Li was going to take off his last cumbersome shirt, her fingers accidentally scraped between his legs. The originally calm Song Chengyin's gaze instantly deepened, but Jiang Li was completely unaware. She looked up at him as she took off her clothes and only had one inner garment left. "Your Majesty, will I go to the imperial study tomorrow or come to the hall of mental cultivation?" Her entire face was exposed in Song Chengyin's field of vision. Against the backdrop of the candlelight, her apricot eyes shone like stars, and her closed mouth looked particularly alluring. Song Chengyin took a quick breath and unconsciously tightened his hands, which were hanging on his side. He turned around and stopped looking at Jiang Li. He said in a deep voice, "Go wait outside the palace." Oh. Jiang Li, who had originally planned to go back to sleep after work, was punished for unintentionally disturbing the emperor's emotions and continued to work overtime in the heart-nourishing hall. She drooped her head and listlessly followed the crowd to the outside of the hall. I already couldn't keep up with overtime, but at this point, Jiang Li received another bad news. The emperor's favorability towards her decreased to 5%. Where did she make him unhappy again? Indeed, it is a man's deep-sea needle. Dog men changed their faces quickly. At this time, only Song Chengyin was left in the vast hall of mental cultivation. He took a deep breath and slowly released his clenched fist. He is not someone who is loyal to romantic affairs and has always had a pure heart and few desires, but just now, he unexpectedly reacted to a eunuch. Song Chengyin felt that this matter was extremely absurd. He pursed his lips, and his hands tightened again and again, before finally lying on his side in bed and forcing himself to close his eyes. But as soon as I closed my eyes, Jiang Li's face unconsciously appeared in my mind. Her eyebrows and eyes, her lips. Song Chengyin flipped over irritably, feeling that he must be crazy. He tossed and turned in bed. The more he wanted to throw Jiang Li's face out of his mind, the clearer her face became. I kept tossing and turning, but in the end, I was so tired that I fell asleep. Jiang Li and a group of palace attendants were guarding outside the palace. It was drizzling outside, and occasionally a chill seeped in from her collar, making Jiang Li shiver from the cold. On duty, and even kicked people out of the door. It's outrageous. Jiang Li rubbed her hands and was about to ask the nearby father-in-law why there was no one on duty in the hall at night when Song Chengyin's voice came from inside the hall. Don't leave." Jiang Li was taken aback for a moment, thinking that she had hallucinations, and looked at the palace door with suspicion. "No, mother consort, don't leave me." At this moment, Song Chengyin's mournful voice came from inside the hall again, and Jiang Li could hear it clearly. After realizing that he might have had a nightmare, Jiang Li instinctively wanted to walk towards the hall, when the father-in-law beside her stopped her. "Little pear grandpa, can't use it, can't use it. Jiang Li frowned and said, "Why?" The father-in-law explained, "Empress Dowager Zhuang has always been a pain in your Majesty's heart. Your Majesty is often haunted by nightmares because of this matter. Your Majesty does not want people to see his embarrassment, which is why I am not allowed to wait in the palace to serve him." Even though the palace concubines had previously served as attendants, no one had ever stayed overnight by your Majesty's side. At night, your Majesty did not allow anyone to stay by your side. This is sacred, and violating your Majesty's will result in beheading. Jiang Li's eyebrows furrowed even deeper upon hearing this. Where is the imperial physician? Your Majesty is haunted by nightmares. Does the imperial physician not know how to prescribe medicine for treatment? Should your Majesty bear it on his own? Jiang Li has also had nightmares and knows how scared and helpless it is to be haunted by them. It's useless. The imperial physician prescribed various sedatives for your Majesty, but they still couldn't cure his Majesty's symptoms. I'll go in and take a look. Jiang Li brushed aside her father-in-law's hand and walked straight towards the palace door. Xializi, come back quickly. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Crazy Criticism of a Tyrant Without Inheritance versus a Pretty and Soft Eunuch, 09. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9. Crazy Criticism of a Tyrant Without Inheritance versus a Pretty and Soft Eunuch, 09. When the palace attendants outside the palace realized, Jiang Li had already pushed open the door and stepped into the heart-nourishing hall. What should we do? As they watched the reopened palace door, the palace members hurriedly turned around, but dared not disobey the imperial decree and step into the heart-nourishing hall for half a step. Jiang Li walked straight toward Song Chengyin in the inner hall. No, don't leave me, mother. Song Chengyin's dreamy voice kept coming from the inner hall. Jiang Li quickly walked to the inner hall and found that Song Chengyin was constantly waving his hands to grab something. Jiang Li pursed her lips, although she was not sure what had happened back then, she knew the pain of being haunted by nightmares. She didn't see Song Chengyin's expression until she got to the front and back of the bed. At this moment, his eyebrows were furrowed tightly, sweat beads the size of beans were oozing from his forehead, and every pore on his face emitted endless pain. Even the eyelashes were wet, making it difficult to distinguish between tears and sweat. Your Majesty, wake up. Jiang Li quickly took out a handkerchief to wipe the sweat beads on his forehead, trying to wake him up, but Song Chengyin remained immersed in a dream, unable to wake him up no matter how Jiang Li called. Don't leave me, don't leave me. With a pleading tone, Song Chengyin's face was extremely uneasy. At this moment, the arrogant king was like an abandoned child, choking up in a low voice. Your Majesty, don't be afraid. Your mother's consort will always be with you. Jiang Li gently comforted Song Chengyin while wiping his sweat. In his sleep, Song Chengyin couldn't hear any words and remained immersed in endless pain. At this moment, he was like a fish trapped in the mud and sand, searching hard but unable to find the direction of the sea. No, no, don't leave. Song Chengyin struggled in pain, his big palm constantly reaching forward, as he was about to fall into the abyss. At this moment, a warm hand grabbed him and led him away from the endless darkness. Don't leave, Your Majesty. Don't worry, I'm not going anywhere. I'll be here with Your Majesty. Jiang Li grabbed Song Chengyin's big palm and coaxed him softly like a child, following his words. Song Chengyin tightly grasped Jiang Li's hand as if he had grabbed the last life-saving straw. Don't leave me. Okay, don't leave, never leave. After receiving Jiang Li's approval, Song Chengyin's furrowed brow slowly relaxed, and the unease on his face gradually dissipated. Jiang Li breathed a sigh and finally pulled the ancestor back from his nightmare. She covered Song Chengyin with a blanket and was about to turn around when Song Chengyin held onto her hand tightly. Don't leave, okay? If Jiang Li made a slight movement, Song Chengyin would speak out in prayer, and his relaxed eyebrows tightened together again. "Okay, I won't leave. Your Majesty, rest assured and just take a nap." Jiang Li's finger landed on the center of Song Qingyin's eyebrows, smoothing out the streaks on his forehead. Song Qingyin seemed to be afraid that she would escape, so he grabbed her hand with both hands and tightly clasped it against his own chest. Jiang Li's face showed helplessness, afraid that even if Song Qingyin was disturbed for a while, he wouldn't dare to withdraw his hand. He kept bending down and feeling tired, so he decided to sit directly on the floor in front of the bed. She rested one hand on the bedside to support her chin, while the other hand was held by Song Qingyin and placed on his chest, feeling his strong heartbeat. Whenever Jiang Li tried to pull back her hand, Song Qingyin's grip on her hand would increase, but Jiang Li had no choice but to let him hold it. After an unknown amount of time, Jiang Li's eyelids sank and she fought, lying unconscious by the bed. The next day, Mao hour. At morning time, Song Qingyin, who had already formed a biological clock, woke up. The delicate and soft touch in his hand came, and he instinctively lowered his eyes to see himself holding onto a white and tender hand. And the owner of that hand, Song Qingyin, turned his head to look at the small head lying by the bed. "It's him. Is it him who was there last night?" Although Song Qingyin did not wake up from his nightmare last night, he had some perception of someone wiping his sweat and gently comforting him last night. That person was like a beam of light in endless darkness, pulling him from the abyss to the shore. He struggled to open his eyes and see who that person was, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't open his eyes. "I never thought it was him. The little eunuch who touched his emotions." Song Qingyin gently released Jiang Li's hand, feeling indescribable in his heart. He was about to get up when the back of his head suddenly turned his head towards Jiang Li. Jiang Li slept by the bed all night without even taking off her hat, which was still on her head. But as she twisted her head, her hat became crooked and twisted, and a strand of hair crawled out from under her forehead. Song Qingyin, who had originally planned to get up, lay back and looked fixedly at Jiang Li lying by the bed. After seeing the scattered hair hanging at the corner of her eye, he reached out his hand by a stroke of magic, pinched her hair, and pursed it aside. After realizing what he was doing, Song Qingyin's face stiffened and he ran away as if taking back his big palm, then walked down from the bed. "Change clothes." It was only after walking all the way to the outer hall that Song Qingyin spoke up and asked the palace attendants on duty outside to come in and change their clothes. The tightly closed palace door was pushed open from outside, and the palace people walked in respectfully with their heads down. The one who fetches water, the one who changes clothes, walks through the hall in an orderly manner, taking care of everything. Everyone seems calm on the surface, but in reality, they are a group of anxious people. Grandpa Xiaolizi didn't come out all night last night. Now that His Majesty has woken up and no trace of him has been seen, shouldn't he have? When did he come in last night? Everyone was lost in thought when Song Qingyin's voice came from in front of them. Last night, only Grandpa Xiaolizi stepped into the heart-nourishing hall alone. The one who came to ask His Majesty was referring to Grandpa Xiaolizi. The father-in-law who stopped Xiaolizi last night secretly sweated and then truthfully said, "Your Majesty, Xiaolizi entered the heart-nourishing hall during the hour of high." Song Qingyin squinted his eyes. As expected, he stayed with him all night at the heart-nourishing hall during the hour of high. He said calmly, "He's a newcomer who doesn't understand the rules." "Did you also eat the rules into the dog's stomach?" "Your Majesty, please forgive me." Everyone in the hall knelt down, their spines lying on the ground, their bodies trembling, and their heads drooping. "I would like to inform Your Majesty that last night, before entering the heart-nurturing hall, little Lizi Gonggong had been warned by the servant about Your Majesty's will. However, little Lizi Gonggong was really worried about Your Majesty's safety, so he stubbornly disobeyed Your Majesty's will and entered the hall. I dare not disobey the holy will, dare not even step into the heart-nourishing hall, and can only watch little Lizi Gonggong enter helplessly." Little Lazy Gonggong is also worried that His Majesty will be haunted by nightmares, which will lead to his disobedience and disrespect. Please forgive me, Your Majesty. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. Crazy Criticism of the Heirless Tyrant versus the Pretty and Soft Little Eunuch, 10. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. Crazy Criticism of the Heirless Tyrant versus the Pretty and Soft Little Eunuch, 10. The father.in.law braved the pressure to exonerate Zhongli, fearing that His Majesty would punish Xiaolizi as a crime of disobedience and disrespect in anger. Last night's situation was witnessed by them with their own eyes. Little Lazy, the Duke, was indeed worried that His Majesty disregarded their obstruction and broke into the heart-nourishing hall. If you are punished by His Majesty for this, it would be unjust. Fortunately, after Song Chengyin finished asking, there was no further instruction, and the palace members breathed a sigh of relief. After changing into his court uniform, Song Chengyin walked straight towards the outside of the hall, leaving a sentence before leaving. Let him go back and rest, then come and serve after he has rested. Yes. Several dukes followed Song Chengyin out of the heart-nourishing hall, while the remaining dukes continued to stay and wait in the hall. After the group left the heart-nourishing hall, a father.in.law hurriedly walked towards the inner hall. Seeing Zhongli sleeping by the bed, his tiger body trembled and he quickly ran to her side, gently patting her shoulder. Little Pear Grandpa, wake up, Little Pear Grandpa. Zhongli opened her eyes in a daze and muttered to her familiar face, to my father.in.law. She straightened up, her thoughts still immersed in chaos. Why did Grandpa Xiang come in? Where is Your Majesty? Oh dear Little Pear, Your Majesty has already gone to court. Zhongli woke up in an instant, enduring her numbness and standing up from the ground. She straightened her crooked hat and said, I'm going to chase Your Majesty. She was about to catch up with Sa Yazi when she grabbed her arm from her father.in.law and said, Little Lazy, there's no need to chase after her. Your Majesty has specially allowed you to go back and rest. You can go to Your Majesty's side to serve you when you're fully asleep. So good. Being a tyrant still has some conscience. Zhongli rubbed her sore arms on the pillow and walked out of the heart-nourishing hall. Xiao Duo, what is the tyrant's current favorability rating? Host, it's already 20%. Zhongli raised an eyebrow, it seems that the punishment from last night was not in vain. Surprisingly, it increased by 15% in one go. Zhongli carried her clothes and left the heart-nourishing hall happily, but did not directly return to the Imperial Academy. Instead, she went to the Shangyi Bureau. Mao Gonggong said that she had already reported her size to the Shangyi Bureau yesterday, and the clothes should have been ready today. Yesterday, she was embarrassed because she stepped on the corner of her clothes, and she didn't want to have another big horse lying on the road. As soon as Zhongli arrived at the entrance of the Shangyi Bureau, she saw a group of palace maids already busy with their affairs, dyeing and washing. The palace maids gathered in groups of 3 or 5, working and whispering. Although the work of Shangyi Bureau is tiring, it is much more comfortable than serving around the emperor and his consort. After seeing Zhongli, everyone stopped their movements and curiously looked at her. Which palace's father.in.law is this? How beautiful she was. More than any of the goddesses they have ever seen. Everyone looked at Zhongli with astonishment on their faces, and no one doubted her identity. Concealing one's identity and pretending to be a eunuch is a crime of deceiving the king, and one's head will be killed. Under the gaze of everyone, Zhongli walked into the Shangyi Bureau with her robe in hand. Just now, everyone was only looking at Zhongli's face, and only then did they see the palace attire symbolizing a first-class father.in.law on her body. They quickly lowered their heads, afraid of colliding with her. Zhongli walked straight to the Shangyi Bureau and asked the nanny for her palace attire. When she came out, she heard the low voices of several palace maids talking. Have you heard that a rain last night caused the taro leaves by Yeyang Lake to bloom? Really? Last year, when I was delivering clothes to the Yuehua Palace, I passed by Yeyang Lake and saw taro leaves surrounding the lake. The lake was shrouded in mist, and it was truly a spectacle. I don't know if there's still a chance this year to visit Yeyang Lake before the taro leaves wither. Jiang Li's eyes flickered slightly as she jotted down the conversation between the two of them. Yeyang Lake, taro leaves. She thought of a way to earn the favor of a tyrant. Jiang Li walked toward several palace maids and said, "May I ask where Yeyang Lake is?" The first class father.in. Law, who was serving beside His Majesty, suddenly came to talk to him. The few of them were somewhat flattered and quickly stopped their work and got up. If I were to return to my father.in. Law, Yeyang Lake is not far from the mountain behind the imperial garden. Jiang Li nodded at the others and said, "Thank you very much." After taking note of the location of Yeyang Lake, Jiang Li left the Shangyi Bureau with a tray containing palace costumes. Xiao Duo, are there any sedatives in the system mall? Yes, a calming potion with 30 points can last for half a month. Can you exchange it for it? Jiang Li gritted her teeth and said, "Exchange. I can't bear to let go of children, I can't bear to trap wolves, I can't bear to score points and attack the emperor." Jiang Li quickly found a calming potion in her hand. She quietly hid it in her sleeve and walked towards the supervisor. On the other side, the ceremonial supervisor. Zhang Gonggang and Fu Gonggang can be said to have fallen from the ends of the world now, because they provoked Jiang Li and both suffered injuries. However, Grandpa Fu can still walk with a cane, and Grandpa Zhang can't stand up anymore. Fu Gonggang stood in the courtyard with a cane, directing several eunuchs to set traps to assassinate Jiang Li. Damn it, little pear has caused him so much trouble, he must give him some bitterness to taste. You two have hidden the nails for me. And you guys, put that wooden bucket away properly, don't let the lime water inside pour out. Fu Gonggang stood in the courtyard pointing at several young eunuchs. A few people dared not disobey his orders, so they hid a nail under the carpet in front of the door and placed a wooden bucket filled with lime water on top of the door. After completing all of this, several eunuchs timidly approached Duke Fu. "Let it go, let it go. May I ask if Grandpa Fu has any other instructions?" Fu Gonggang squinted his eyes and looked at the few people with a warning in his tone. "It's not up for now. Let's keep busy. If anyone asks about this matter, I don't need to teach you how to say it, do you?" "No, no need." The heads of several people were shaking like a tambourine. Fu Gong finally withdrew his gaze with satisfaction. A few people had just dispersed when Jiang Li returned from the Shangyi Bureau holding a tray. At the moment when her figure appeared in the officialdom, several glances fell on her. "Xiaolizi, Grandpa, has returned. Have you been tired from serving your Majesty for a day and a night?" Fu Gonggang, who had always liked to bully Jiang Li, unexpectedly welcomed him with a pleasant expression, his already big eyes narrowed into a narrow slit. Jiang Li's eyes darkened, and if something goes wrong, there must be a demon. Jiang Li's gaze swept over the faces of several eunuchs in the courtyard, and she noticed that the young eunuchs were winking at her. Fu Gonggang limped up to Jiang Li and said with a smile, "Xiaolizi Gonggang has worked hard. Last night, I thought about what happened earlier and it was indeed my fault. I apologize to you. Do you think we can shake hands and make peace?" Jiang Li concealed the profound meaning in her eyes and looked at Fu Gonggang with a smile on her face. "Has the sun set in the west today? What is Xiaolizi Gonggang saying? Everyone is a Gonggang serving in the palace, looking down but not looking up. There is nothing difficult to pass, isn't there?" End of this chapter.